No one from my family came to my graduation. Not a single familiar face was there when I looked into the crowd. As my name rang out through the stadium speakers, the section marked "Reserved for Family" remained painfully vacant, the sunlight reflecting off rows of cold metal seats. I smiled for the graduation photo anyway, acting as though the emptiness didn't hurt. 3 days later, a message from my mother appeared on my phone. Need $2,100 for your sister's Sweet 16. There was no congratulations, no acknowledgement of my achievement, just a demand. So I sent her $1 with a short note that read, "Congrats." Then I changed the locks. For the first time in a long while, my apartment was completely quiet. But that peace didn't last long. Graduation day was supposed to be the moment I finally felt noticed. The stadium shimmered beneath the warm May sun, filled with a sea of navy blue gowns and proud families holding phones high to capture every second. When my name echoed through the speakers, Camila Elaine Reed, Master of Data Analytics, I instinctively lifted my eyes toward the front rows. The section reserved for family stared back at me, empty and gleaming beneath the light. There wasn't even a silhouette where my parents should have been sitting. I forced myself to smile for the camera, gripping my diploma tighter than necessary. My cheeks ached from pretending everything was fine. Around me, joy exploded like confetti. Graduates embraced their parents. Friends buried their faces in flower bouquets and tears. Meanwhile, I stood alone beside a stranger's family as they took pictures, feeling my smile fade with every camera flash. After the ceremony, I lingered in the courtyard, scrolling through my phone simply to appear occupied. My classmate, Ruby, spotted me and hurried over. "You did it," she squealed. Her parents immediately started snapping photos of us together, both of us smiling. Then Ruby glanced around the crowd. "Where's your family? Running late." I lied. The answer came effortlessly after years of practice. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sky had turned a rich shade of gold. Balloons floated above vehicles. Children shouted. Car horns sounded from every direction. Sitting inside my battered Civic, I watched the celebrations unfold through the windshield. For a brief moment, I imagined my family walking toward me. Mom would be waving. Avery would be wearing her glitter-covered sneakers. Dad would be carrying a bouquet of flowers. Then reality returned with the roar of engines starting all around me. The truth was, I shouldn't have been surprised. My parents had missed my college graduation too. Back then, Mom claimed Avery had final exams. Dad never even bothered to call. There was always a reason. Always something smaller, yet somehow more important. Throughout my teenage years, I treated love like a scholarship I had to earn. I worked 2 jobs. I sent money home. I agreed to every request. When I was 16, I stood behind a Starbucks counter before sunrise, serving caramel macchiatos to lawyers, nurses, and early commuters. Mom's texts would arrive regularly. "Thanks, honey. Avery needs piano lessons." Or, "She has a field trip coming up. Just a little extra." And I always said okay. The first time Mom told me, "You're our pride," I believed every word. Back then, I thought appreciation and love were the same thing. Now I understand that what I mistook for love was obligation. When I was accepted into graduate school, I convinced myself that this degree would finally change everything. I believed that if I achieved enough, Mom would eventually see me as more than a backup plan, more than a dependable paycheck disguised as a daughter. Maybe she would finally see me as an equal. What I didn't understand was that success could also become another excuse to take from me. 3 days after graduation, while my cap and gown were still hanging beside the door, her text arrived. "Need $2,100 for your sister's Sweet 16. No congratulations. No questions about the ceremony. No interest in how I felt. Just a number and an expectation." I stared at the message for a long time. That was the moment something deep inside me, something exhausted, neglected, and silent for years, finally stood up. I stared so long that my phone screen dimmed and locked itself. The amount sat there like an order rather than a request. By then, I should have been used to it. For years, Money had been the language my family spoke instead of affection. But this time, it hit differently. Maybe it was the emptiness that followed graduation. Maybe it was hearing applause meant for everyone except me. Or maybe I had finally run out of excuses for purchasing affection that had never existed in the first place. I opened my banking app. My savings account held less than $3,000. Something inside me hardened. I transferred $1, typed congrats into the notes section, and pressed send. For nearly a minute, I sat there staring at the confirmation screen. Then I opened the drawer beside the front door and removed the spare key my mother had insisted on keeping for emergencies. I threw it straight into the trash. That evening, I called a locksmith. An hour later, he arrived, an older man with a gentle voice. The tools hanging from his belt clinked softly, like wind chimes, while he worked. When the new lock clicked into place, the sound felt permanent. Final. After he left, I stood in the doorway, breathing in the faint scent of metal and machine oil. It was the first real boundary I had ever created for myself. The following morning, sunlight poured through my apartment windows. I brewed coffee and watched the steam twist upward through the air. For the first time, silence didn't make me uncomfortable. It belonged to me. No one could walk in uninvited. No one could demand anything.
Peace had a sound.
And this was it. At least, until the knocking began. Firm, rhythmic, relentless. I froze. It wasn't Mrs. Patel, my landlord. She always called before showing up. Peering through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers standing in the hallway. Denver Police. One of them said calmly, "Miss Reed." My heart started pounding as I opened the door. Yes, the taller officer, a black man in his 30s, displayed his badge. "We received a call from your mother," he explained. "She reported that you've been acting erratically, changing your locks, and refusing to answer calls. She's concerned you may be a danger to yourself." I nearly laughed. Not because it was amusing, because the accusation was so absurd that it somehow looped back around to being tragic. "She did what?" I asked quietly. His expression softened. "We just need to verify that you're okay," he said. "Would you mind if we stepped inside?" I stepped aside and allowed them to enter. The apartment was immaculate. A coffee cup rested on the table, my laptop sat open with my project displayed on the screen, and my diploma hung neatly framed on the wall. Sweeping a hand around the room, I asked, "Do I really look unstable to you?" The officer's lips twitched as though he were suppressing a smile. "Not even remotely, ma'am." He proceeded to ask several routine questions about my work, stress levels, and family situation. I answered truthfully. I had recently completed graduate school, was actively applying for jobs, had no medical concerns, and was simply trying to establish healthy boundaries. He nodded in understanding. "We'll mark this report as unfounded. If your mother contacts us again, you can refer to this visit." The officers turned toward the door. Just before leaving, one of them paused and added, "Sometimes, when people finally start standing up for themselves, the people who benefited from their silence panic. It happens more often than you'd think." After the door shut behind them, I leaned against it. My body trembled, not from fear, but from anger. My mother hadn't merely crossed a boundary. She had openly challenged it. That evening, I sat alone on the couch, the police report still fresh in my inbox. My mind replayed years of manipulation. Every guilt trip, every time she pressured me into sending money, every occasion she repeated that familiar line, "Family helps family," whenever I hesitated. Looking back, it had never been about love or support. It had always been about control. At that point, I still didn't know the full extent of what she had done. What I did know was this: if she was willing to weaponize the police to embarrass me, there was no telling what she might do next. The silence inside my apartment no longer felt calming. It felt like the eerie stillness before a storm. And I was finished waiting to be struck by lightning. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The city remained quiet beneath a blanket of pale haze. My phone rested face down beside the police report on the table. Since sending officers to my door, my mother hadn't contacted me. But I knew better than to mistake her silence for peace. With her, silence was strategy. I brewed a cup of coffee and opened my laptop, intending to focus on job applications. Instead, I opened my banking app. Instantly, a knot formed in my stomach. Two unfamiliar credit inquiries appeared on the screen. Capital One. Discover. Both recent. Both unauthorized. My pulse quickened. I hadn't applied for any new credit cards. I immediately pulled up my credit report. Two accounts had been opened using my identity. They listed my social security number and my personal information, but the address wasn't mine. It was my parents' house in Littleton. I went completely still. The balances on both accounts were already rising. Thousands of dollars had been charged. Then I reviewed the transactions. Cherry Creek Events. Denver DJ Agency. Glam Studio. Suddenly, my mother's text echoed in my memory like a gunshot. Need $200 for your sister's Sweet 16. It had never been a request. It had been preparation. A setup. I dialed the customer service number listed on the statement. My voice trembled, but my words remained steady. This is Camila Reed. I need to report identity theft. The representative verified my information. After a brief pause, she said, "This account was opened in person at our Littleton branch last month. The co-applicant is Linda M. Reed." For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. The refrigerator's hum, the ticking clock, even my own breathing. Everything faded into silence. "Ma'am," the representative continued carefully, "we're flagging this account for a fraud investigation. You'll receive the necessary paperwork within 24 hours. When the call ended, I stared at the screen in disbelief. The evidence was undeniable. My mother's signature, her phone number, her address. She hadn't merely taken money from me. She had stolen my identity and become me in order to get it. I opened the voice recorder on my phone. Colorado's one-party consent law meant I could legally record our next conversation. I called her. She answered after the third ring. Her voice was sharp. "So, you're still alive." "Mom," I replied calmly, "I found 2 credit cards opened under my name using your address. Would you like to explain that?" She laughed. It sounded hollow and rehearsed. "Oh, that? I was helping you build credit. You should be thanking me instead of complaining. And you still owe money for Avery's Sweet 16. Stop making everything dramatic. It's family money. What's yours is ours." "No," I said quietly. "What's mine belongs to me. And what's yours is now under investigation." The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, shocked. Then I heard her sharp intake of breath. "You wouldn't dare." "I already did." I ended the call. Then I saved the recording and titled it, Boundaries, May 17, 2025. Outside, morning sunlight stretched across the floor. It caught the edges of my diploma and reflected off the new lock installed on my door. Both represented something important. Proof that everything I had achieved was earned through my own effort. And proof that, at last, I was protecting it. For the first time in a very long while, the silence inside my apartment felt different. It no longer felt like the warning sign before a storm. It felt like strength. The storm had finally arrived, and for the first time in my life, I was the one carrying the thunder. I arranged to meet them at a diner in Highlands Ranch, a neutral location positioned halfway between their home and the peace I had worked so hard to build. It was the kind of place filled with worn leather booths, chipped tabletops, and coffee that never seemed fresh. Still, it was exactly what I needed. Public enough to discourage a scene, quiet enough for serious conversation, and far too crowded for anyone to start shouting. They showed up 15 minutes late. My mother walked in first, dressed in a floral dress and hiding behind oversized sunglasses that looked more like armor than an accessory. My father followed a few steps behind her, appearing smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Avery came last, her attention glued to her phone, thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. The golden child never even bothered to look up. "Camila," Mom said sharply as she slid into the booth across from me. "You really made us drive all the way out here for dinner?" "We're not here to eat," I replied. Even I was surprised by the sound of my voice. It was calm, steady, and cold. "We're here to talk." The waitress stopped by, filled our coffee cups, and disappeared again without a word. I reached into my bag and pushed a brown folder across the table. 2 credit cards were opened under my name, I said. A Capital One card and a Discover card. Both were registered to your address, and both were used to pay for Avery's Sweet 16. Mom's smile barely shifted. Oh, honey, she said. I did that for your benefit. You needed credit history. I was helping you. Helping? I repeated quietly. You forged my signature. She flicked her hand dismissively. Don't be so dramatic. We're family. You've always been ungrateful. Do you really think people don't know who paid for your education? A sharp laugh escaped me, loud enough to make several people in the diner glance in our direction. You mean me? I asked. I paid for my education. Every paycheck. Every double shift. Every loan you convinced me to take while my college fund was being spent on Avery's prom dress. Avery groaned and rolled her eyes. Here we go again. I turned toward her. That silver dress you wore to your prom? The one you spent all night dancing in? It was purchased with a card opened in my name. I hope you enjoyed being the center of attention. Her eyes immediately shifted away from mine. Mom said you agreed, she muttered. Before I could answer, Mom's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. That's enough. You do not speak to your sister that way. Then she looked directly at me. I didn't steal from you, Camila. I borrowed money for the family. You stole my identity, I said, my voice quieter now but far more dangerous. You called the police on me because I changed the locks. You tried to convince everyone I was unstable because you were afraid of losing control. That ends today. For the first time, Dad finally spoke. His voice sounded small. Sweetheart, your mother just got carried away. Let's not turn this into something bigger than it needs to be. We can handle this privately. I pushed the folder even closer to him. There's no handling it privately anymore. What do you mean? Mom asked. The bank already knows, I said. There's an active investigation. The color vanished from her face. You did what? I reported the fraud. The accounts have been frozen. The bank has your signature, your phone number, and your address. You'll be hearing from them very soon. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt tangible. Even the usual background noise of the diner seemed to fade, as though the entire room had stopped to listen. You'll regret this, Mom hissed. You're tearing this family apart over a misunderstanding. I rose from my seat. No, Mom, I said. You destroyed this family the moment you decided my name was more valuable to you than my love. I placed cash on the table for my coffee and walked away before she could respond. Outside, the air carried the scent of approaching rain. I sat inside my car for a long time, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hands trembled, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. There was an emptiness inside me, yet it wasn't painful. It was the kind of emptiness left behind when a burden is finally removed, the kind that makes room for peace. That evening, Cherry Creek sparkled beneath purple and silver lights. It was the night of Avery's Sweet 16 celebration. I hadn't been invited, but I didn't need an invitation. I already knew exactly how the story was going to end. At 8:45 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but I picked up anyway. Miss Reed? A composed female voice asked. My name is Lauren Stein, and I'm a legal representative for Capital One in Colorado. I'm contacting you to let you know that the bank has officially escalated your fraud complaint. Our internal investigators have coordinated with local law enforcement to verify the transactions connected to tonight's event at Cherry Creek Events. Your attendance is not required, but we felt it was important to keep you informed. A knot formed in my throat. You're sending police to the venue? I asked. Yes, ma'am, she replied. It's standard procedure. We'll be documenting the situation and confirming the charges. After thanking her, I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. Through the open window, faint music drifted up from downtown. Somewhere out there, a celebration was still happening, unaware that everything was about to come apart. 40 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. A text from Avery. Are you insane? The police just showed up. The DJ stopped everything. Everyone is staring. Mom is freaking out. Another message followed seconds later. They're saying her name. The bank representative mentioned you. What did you do? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Across town, two police officers stepped into the brightly lit banquet hall. There were no flashing lights or sirens, just a quiet sense of authority moving through the room. Behind them walked a bank representative carrying a thick folder stuffed with contracts, receipts, and documentation. Good evening, one officer said evenly. We're here to verify a report involving credit card fraud connected to this event. The charges in question were made using an account registered under the name Camila Reed. Whispers immediately spread through the crowd. Phones were lifted. People began recording. Near the cake table, my mother stood frozen as the color drained from her face. There has to be some mistake, she said, her voice shaking. The banker opened the folder and began reading from the documents. Primary applicant, Linda M. Reed. Co-signer, unauthorized. Transaction records indicate the misuse of another individual's identity. A collective gasp swept through the room. Someone quietly whispered, "Isn't that her daughter's name?" My mother opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Avery stood in the middle of the dance floor, tears gathering in her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "what did you do?" The officer remained calm and professional. "No one is being arrested tonight. We're simply gathering documentation for the bank's investigation. However, we will need copies of receipts and identification for verification purposes." The room fell silent. The only sounds were camera shutters and phone notifications. Half the guests openly recorded the scene. The other half pretended they weren't watching. Within minutes, the DJ disconnected his equipment. The banner that read Avery's Sweet 16, Born to Shine sagged heavily in the humid air overhead. Guests slowly filtered out of the venue in waves, leaving behind whispers, awkward glances, and sympathy. By the time my mother stepped outside, a steady rain had begun falling. Back in my apartment, I stood beside the window and watched flashes of lightning pulse across the Denver skyline. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply stood there and allowed the silence to settle around me. It sounded like justice, quiet, undeniable, and complete. For years, I believed silence was the sound of weakness. That night, I finally understood it could also be the sound of victory. 3 days later, the storm itself had passed, but the damage remained. An email arrived from Capital One. Fraud investigation resolved. Primary applicant Linda M. Reed has acknowledged unauthorized account use and agreed to repay $8,412 in full. One sentence. No apology. No theatrics. Just the truth, finally documented. The news traveled quickly. In a suburb like Littleton, gossip moves far faster than justice ever does. People discussed it in grocery store aisles, after church services, and over backyard fences. Did you hear about the Reeds? Something involving a bank and that Sweet 16 party. A 30-second video clip showing police officers entering the event and guests reacting in disbelief accumulated more than 500,000 views before Avery finally locked her social media accounts. My father also faced consequences. He received a quiet reprimand at work for allowing personal mail and financial statements to be delivered to his company's address. For once, I felt no guilt. I ignored every message they sent, not because I was angry, because I was exhausted. I was finished explaining things that should have been obvious from the beginning. I completed the FDC paperwork, froze my credit reports, and closed every account my mother had ever been connected to. Then, I printed the final confirmation letter and pinned it to the wall beside my framed diploma and the locksmith's receipt. 3 documents. 3 reminders. Proof of effort. Proof of protection. Proof of freedom. That evening, I made a cup of tea, opened the window, and let Denver's cool night air fill the room. Below, the city continued its endless hum, alive, busy, and completely indifferent. For the first time in years, the silence no longer hurt. It healed. 6 months later, autumn settled across Denver. Golden leaves lined the streets, and the air carried a crisp sense of renewal. I had started a new position at Nova Data Labs, surrounded by people who valued me for what I created rather than what I could provide. Hanging on my wall were 3 items: my diploma, my employee badge, and the old lock I had once replaced. Together, they told the entire story. The story of the moment I finally chose myself. If you've ever had to draw a boundary simply to breathe again, know that you're not alone. Tell me where you're watching from, so I can see how many of us eventually found the strength to change the locks.